was halfway across the world when my home security app sent a notification that changed everything. 3 strangers were in my living room, and my own sister-in-law had given them the key. I didn't know yet that I was being framed for a dangerous, organized scheme, and that my life was about to be systematically erased. The spare key to my house was supposed to be for emergencies only, a glass break scenario, or a burst pipe while I was out of town for work. It was never meant to be a golden ticket for my sister-in-law, Elena, to play landlord while I was half a world away. I had spent 3 years meticulously renovating that property, turning a crumbling inheritance into a sanctuary of mid-century aesthetics and high-end tech. When I left for my 6-week contract in Singapore, the house was supposed to be a tomb of silence, guarded by motion sensors and a top-tier security system. The trouble started on a Tuesday, 4 weeks into my trip. I was sitting in a high-rise cafe, sipping lukewarm coffee, when my phone pinged with a notification from my security app. It wasn't a standard alarm. It was a notification that the smart lock had been engaged by a guest code I didn't recognize. My heart did a slow, painful somersault in my chest. I checked the live feed, expecting to see maybe a neighbor checking the mail, or perhaps Elena dropping off a package. Instead, my screen filled with the grainy, high-definition figures of 3 men in leather jackets, lugging heavy, nondescript duffel bags into my living room. They didn't look like guests. They looked like people who had been waiting for the exact moment the house went empty. I immediately called Elena. She picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice sounding frantic and far too bright, like she was trying to mask the sound of a bustling street behind her. "Oh, hey, I was just about to call you. I had a small plumbing issue at my place, and the landlord has people in, so I'm staying at a friend's for a bit." "Is everything okay?" Her tone was performative, a practiced casualness that set off every alarm bell in my nervous system. I didn't beat around the bush. I pulled up the camera feed and took a screenshot, sending it directly to her WhatsApp. "Elena, who are these people in my house? Why are they carrying bags that look heavy enough to hold illegal items? And why does my smart lock log say you gave them access?" The line went deathly silent. I could hear her sharp intake of breath, a sudden jagged sound that told me exactly how deep she was in. She started stammering, spinning some pathetic web about a friend of a friend who needed a place to crash, but her voice cracked when I told her I was recording the call and had already notified the police. Her bravado crumbled in an instant. She didn't just rent my place out for some extra cash. She had essentially opened the front door to an organized scheme that had been looking for a blind spot in the city's radar. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice dropping to a terrified tremor. "They aren't just guests. They're part of a dangerous circle. If you call the authorities now, they'll know I'm the one who tipped you off. They'll come for me, and they'll make sure your house is destroyed before the police even arrive." My blood turned to ice. She wasn't just talking about a messy tenant. She was describing people who carried illegal weapons and were involved in trafficking large quantities of prohibited substances. She had used my home as a drop point, a safe house for a dangerous enterprise, and she had done it because she owed them money. I hung up on her and immediately called the local precinct, my fingers shaking so hard I could barely tap the buttons. I didn't care about Elena anymore. I cared about my home, my life, and the fact that I was currently being framed for facilitating a crime ring from across the ocean. The dispatcher's voice was calm, but the gravity of what I was telling them made the atmosphere in the cafe feel claustrophobic. I told them everything: the unauthorized access, the suspicious cargo, and the names Elena had let slip in her panic. I watched the screen as the men in my living room stopped moving. They seemed to freeze, staring directly into the lens of the hidden camera in the hallway, as if they could feel my eyes on them. Then, one of them reached into his jacket and pulled out a device I didn't recognize, a signal jammer. My screen flickered. The audio cut out first, leaving me with nothing but the visual of them moving toward the back of the house. Just as the image began to pixelate into static, the man who had been the most aggressive turned toward the camera, lifted his hand, and slowly, deliberately, tapped the lens until it went completely, terrifyingly black. My phone vibrated in my palm, a text from an unknown number. It was a single image of my own front door, open, with a shadow looming on the threshold. Then the screen went dark entirely, and my access to the house was completely wiped. The black screen of my phone felt like a physical weight pressing down on my palms. Every nerve in my body was vibrating with a high-pitched hum of adrenaline. I was thousands of miles away, staring at a dead device, while the people who had just violated my sanctuary were likely tearing it apart to ensure I had no more eyes inside. I didn't wait for the police to call me back. I contacted my property management firm, the ones who handled the seasonal maintenance, and demanded they send a private security detail to the house immediately. I didn't tell them about the illegal cargo. That was for the authorities. I told them I had evidence of a break-in and that my smart system had been compromised. An hour crawled by, each minute feeling like a deliberate, agonizing insult to my sanity. I paced the floor of the airport lounge, catching my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. I looked like a stranger, pale, disheveled, my eyes rimmed with the frantic intensity of someone watching their world collapse. Then my phone chimed. It wasn't the police. It was a notification from my house's secondary hidden security loop, a system I had installed for fire protection that didn't connect to the main Wi-Fi. It had been triggered by a motion sensor in the attic. The frame was grainy, flickering with the harsh light of a tactical flashlight. The men were no longer moving through the living room. They were up there, in the crawl space where I kept my old college yearbooks and a fireproof safe. The man with the signal jammer was holding something, a jagged, metallic object that looked remarkably like a component of an illegal weapon. He wasn't just hiding substances, he was building something. A cold realization washed over me. They weren't using my house as a warehouse. They were using it as an assembly point for a massive organized scheme, a base of operations for a group far more sophisticated than petty burglars. I checked the timestamp. The feed was live, but the audio was back. A low, distorted voice filled the room. "The package isn't here," one of them growled. The sound was muffled, bouncing off the insulation. The sister said it was hidden behind the panels. She lied to us. My breath hitched. Elena had lied to them too. She hadn't just put my life in danger. She had played both sides of a criminal deal, likely hoping to steal whatever they were hiding before they found it. She was trying to frame me while double-crossing a group that dealt in prohibited substances. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Elena. I didn't want to answer, but I needed to know how much damage she had done. "They're at the house, aren't they?" she sobbed, her voice high and shrill. "They told me if I didn't find the key to the wall safe, they'd come for my kids. I didn't have a choice." Her manipulation was sickening. She was trying to make herself the victim when she was the architect of this catastrophe. I told her that the police were already on their way and that her pathetic excuses wouldn't save her from the serious charges she was about to face. "They aren't going to the police," she hissed, her voice shifting from tearful to chillingly cold. "They've intercepted your call logs. They know you spoke to the precinct. They aren't leaving the house, and they aren't planning on running." I stared at the screen, watching the men dismantle the attic floorboards with crowbars. One of them stopped suddenly, his head snapping toward the ceiling vent where the hidden camera was mounted. He reached up, his fingers brushing the plastic casing. He smiled at the lens, a slow, predatory expression that didn't reach his cold eyes. He didn't break the camera this time. Instead, he pulled a small, glowing device from his pocket and attached it to the housing. My screen flashed red, and a countdown appeared. 4:59. It wasn't a jammer. It was a remote relay, and the red light on the device synced with the smart lighting in the rest of my house. Every light in the property flickered on, illuminating the entire street like a lighthouse beacon. My neighbors were going to notice. They were going to call the police, and when they arrived, these people would be prepared. But then I saw it. The man in the attic pulled out a photo. It was a picture of me, taken inside that very airport lounge less than 20 minutes ago. My blood curdled. They hadn't just hacked my house. They were watching me. As I turned around, scanning the crowded lounge for anyone who looked out of place, I saw a man in a gray hoodie standing near the departures board, his eyes locked firmly on the back of my head. The timer on my screen hit 3 o'clock, and the man in the lounge began to walk, slowly and deliberately, straight toward me. The man in the gray hoodie moved through the crowd with the predatory precision of a wolf in a sheep pen. My heartbeat was a frantic drum against my ribs as I realized I had nowhere to run. The lounge was dense with travelers, yet I felt completely isolated, anchored to the spot by the sheer, sickening realization that Elena hadn't just used my house, she had sold my location. I stood up, pretending to check my carry-on, and pivoted toward the security checkpoint. If I could reach the armed officers at the terminal entrance, I might have a fighting chance. I didn't look back until I reached the metal detectors, where I spun around just in time to see the man in the hoodie turn on his heel and disappear into the labyrinthine corridors of the departures wing. He wasn't following me anymore. He was signaling someone else. My phone buzzed one last time. It wasn't a call. It was a text from my own number. "The house is a distraction. Look at your bank account." I pulled up my banking app, my thumbs trembling. My heart sank into my stomach as I saw the balance. 0. Every cent of my savings, the house equity, and even my investment accounts had been wiped clean in a matter of seconds. It wasn't just a physical invasion, it was a total digital erasure. They had used the remote relay in the attic to dump my sensitive data directly into their own offshore server. I wasn't just a victim of a home invasion, I was a victim of a sophisticated financial wipeout. But then a notification popped up from my internal security portal, not the one they had jammed, but the backup emergency-only server that the internal security team used for legal evidence. I hadn't just been recording video, I had been recording data packets. Every time they touched my smart home system, their own devices were logging their unique digital fingerprints. I didn't waste a second. I hit Send to Authority and uploaded the entire log to the specialized desk I'd been in contact with. I didn't just give them a video of men in masks, I gave them the GPS coordinates of the group's central server and the encrypted keys to their own communications network. Within 10 minutes, the chaos began. I watched from the safety of the airport police office as a local news feed popped up on the lobby TV. The house, my beautiful mid-century sanctuary, was surrounded. It wasn't just a few patrol cars, it was a full-scale tactical operation. The group inside didn't even have time to react before the internal security team breached the doors. Because I had handed over their digital signature, the police knew exactly who they were dealing with. It wasn't just a local theft, they were dismantling a high-level organized scheme that had been evading capture for years. Elena was caught 2 hours later trying to board a train out of the state, her bags packed with the very cash she'd been trying to steal from the safe they never found. She thought she was the puppet master, but she was just the bait. When the police finally called me to confirm the arrests, the officer's voice was grim. They were planning to use your house as a permanent base for their distribution of prohibited substances. You didn't just save your property, you helped us break a chain that has been terrorizing this city for a decade. The house was a crime scene for weeks, but the insurance company, seeing the mountain of evidence I'd provided, covered every cent of the damage and the theft. The men who had threatened me were facing decades behind bars for multiple felonies, including the massive attempt to frame me for their crimes. Elena, desperate to save herself, flipped on the entire network, providing enough information to ensure she wouldn't see the light of day for a very long time. A truly massive, insurmountable sentence for her betrayal. I never went back to that house. I sold it to a developer who tore it down to the studs, erasing every trace of the nightmare. I moved to a different coast, bought a place with no smart features, and changed my number. The last I heard, the group was being processed through the system, their entire operation laid bare by the very guest Elena thought she could control. Justice isn't always quick, and it's rarely clean. But watching her mugshot appear on the news, devoid of the smug, manipulative confidence she had displayed at our last dinner, was the most satisfying ending I could have ever imagined. The nightmare had finally ended, and for the first time in months, I could finally sleep in a house that was truly, entirely my own.